Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this edition of Latino Perspective. I'm your host, Reynaldo Cervantes. I produce this show, and today I'm coming from you from our studios in North Omaha. It's City Commons Studios, and my engineer today is Bill Clark, and my technical advisor is Cherry Clark, and I appreciate them taking time out to produce my first show. We did an inaugural show dealing with City Commons. Now this is the one where I'm going to get into some political discussions, and I'm kind of bumping off some of the stuff that I've done regarding cultural awareness and the Chicano movement and self-identity and self-determination, because I think it's important. I'm 67 years old. I've never really stopped and evaluated or assessed the understanding of hegemony that I have, and whether or not individuals who have now come into our area, because when I left Omaha in 1993 to go to Chicago to work with the National Training Institute, OSHA Training Institute, there wasn't that many quote unquote Latinos here. And we did have a fledgling Chicano Awareness Center, which I was one of the original members of the Chicano Awareness Center. And the Chicano Awareness Center was created with a mission in mind and with a purpose in mind. But after I've come back and I've seen that there's but somehow it's no longer Chicano, it's called Latino. That's a concept. It has nothing to do with anything or anybody. It's not a put down. It's not taking any one person to task. We're talking about ideology here. And ideology is critical in terms of understanding your state of being right now in America. And I don't believe, and I may be wrong, but the more I've gotten involved with community organizations, the more I've talked with individuals within our community now, which really is from where I left in '93, there might have been 10, 15,000 predominantly Mexican Americans. There's now over 100,000 here in the metropolitan area. So with that has come a lot of dramatic changes to our community. And South Omaha has been one of the recipients of this tremendous enterprise, entrepreneurial boom. And it's really important that you understand that while we do have an emerging economic base within South Omaha, and we do have this demographic pretty much made up of different ethnic groups, primarily of Latino background, that is critical. You understand that we're still not there. We still have a long way to go, and that just like me, when my grandparents came here to the United States, they were pretty much like the new immigrants are now, in that they had a language issue, they had a cultural issue, but they came because they were called on by the United States to come and help, which was turning into an agrarian economy, which is agriculture. And they came to the Scottsbluff, Nebraska Valley, back in 1925. And what they experienced in their days was similar to what they're experiencing now, the new migration is experiencing now. But now I'm 3 generations removed from that, but still the plight of the downtrodden, the minority, so to speak, has not changed. And I think I put my finger on it because that was my enlightenment. That's the cultural awareness that I got back in the 70s when we created the Chicano Awareness Center, which was part of this enlightenment that we went through. And so what I'm going to try to do now is develop a series of programs with a specific goal set out to try to give you and use my experience, my personal experience, growing up here in America, a 3rd generation American of Mexican descent, and what I went through and where I'm at now at 67 years old. Not that I want to brag about, because I have really nothing to brag about. My background is just very typical of the acculturation process and the inculcation process and the assimilation process that people go through growing up in America. It's the most natural thing, except that when you stop and think about it, you look at the plight of the minorities, quote unquote minorities, black people, brown people, red people, yellow people, whatever you want to call it, it still remains the same. After 200 years, 300 years, we still remain a minority, which that carries a lot of connotations, but it isn't the fact that we're more ignorant or more stupid than the Europeans, the white Europeans. It's that there's a system in place, a racist system in place that you have to recognize exists today as much or even worse than it did back in my grandparents' days. So while there's movement within our community, while there seems to be an improvement, while we seems to be climbing the economic ladder and stuff, when you remove another generation, when the children begin to lose their cultural and traditional backgrounds, they're going to end up as second-class citizens if the system doesn't change. And so now we have to identify what it is within that system that is the problem. And it isn't overt. It isn't overt racism anymore like it used to be in my grandparents' days. And I still remember these signs that there's no dogs, Indians, or Mexicans allowed in this establishment. I haven't seen one of those signs for a long time, although growing up in places where I knew that they didn't allow Mexicans to go into. And so I was always aware of that. And so as I grew up and as I was assimilated into society, at the same time where my expectations were to enjoy the full benefits of being an American who worked hard, who was educated, who did everything that you're supposed to do as a citizen in order to enjoy the American dream, the promise of America, I hit a glass wall when I graduated from high school. And because up until that point, like I said before, I was full of whiz and vinegar. With all the expectations, I was naive, ignorant, thinking I was just as good as anybody else. But soon when you hit the glass wall, the wall of reality, you begin to understand something's wrong here. And I suffered through that period back in Western Nebraska. And it was not a pleasant experience. And it wasn't until I began to understand what it was about the system that was having an impact on me, a negative impact. So it wasn't one individual, and it's a system. So now we have to look at what are we talking about the system, okay? And I'm going to relate to you right now pretty much my educational experience. Have you ever heard the term, to the victor belongs the spoils? And as the person who wins the game, who gains power, begins to be able to predict and choose exactly how things are going to be. And so when a new race or a new conqueror comes into a country, then that person spreads what they call hegemony, because that entity becomes a hegemon. And so what they do is, in order to inculcate the masses, in order to bring the masses so that they follow one trajectory, what they do is create a model. It's called a hegemonic model. And in the United States, it was the European model. It was the Europe, because it was when America, as part of when Columbus landed on the Eastern Shore, and then when the Spaniards landed over in Florida, they brought their hegemony with them. And so when the English came over, it meant the English language. And so, but they had to remove something. Who was the hegemon before the English or the Spaniards? Well, it was the individual Indian tribes, native tribes, okay? And so each native tribe had its own culture, had its own tradition, and they were scattered throughout the Americas. In South America and in Mexico, you had the Mayas, the Incas, and what have you, and the Aztecs. In the northern North America, you had the Sioux, the Comanche, the Apache, all these different tribes. And as one tribe gained control over another, they absorbed that tribe, and whoever tribe controlled became the hegemon, became the person that you adopted their language and you adopted their ways and traditions through the generations. And so when my parents came here to the United States, and my grandparents, they came into a system, a hegemonic system that was based on a European model, an ideology, where English was the language. To the victor belongs the spoils. The victor chose the language. The victor chooses the history. The victor makes up the rules and regulations. And so with the 13 colonies spreading westward, and as they begin to, well, some people said that there was genocide when they killed the native people in order to gain control. And then they brought with them slaves as second-class citizens, sometimes not citizens at all, sometimes not even defined as humans. So all of this begins to move westward. And so as they're replacing the existing hegemon, their hegemony takes over. So if you come in from the outside, pretty much if you're from Mexico, as my grandparents were, then you were inculcated by what hegemony, what hegemon? It was the Spanish hegemon and the French hegemon. So when the French were in control of Mexico, then French was the language that was spoken. The Spanish came in, then Spanish became the language that was spoken. And as they incorporated all of these native people, then, and it was called the miscegenation of the masses. That means that they intertwined with all the masses. So you come up with mixed races, but you still have your pure mixes. You still have your pure native people that you can look at the physical characteristics of a person and see a lot of Maya or Aztec characteristics. But then you have people like me, who's more or less a mixture. I'm a mixture of Spanish heritage, Indian heritage, and culture. That's where my grandparents came from at the time that Spain controlled Mexico, and then there was the revolution, which gained independence from Mexico. So here, my grandparents came to America, just like the immigrants are here now, and they entered into this society, into this system, and the system did not embrace their culture. It did not include their language. It did not include their traditions or customs. It's all based on that European model. And so as we progressed in our generations, as I became assimilated, because I was never taught the Mexican history or Mexican traditions or culture in the sense that I lived it. I lived in America, which was pretty much the European culture, but because I'm a Mexican and my parents were still alive, my grandparents, I also was aware of their language, their customs, their traditions, to the extent that they could bring it with them. It's not like living in Mexico. So I've never had any interest, not because I don't like Mexico, it's not because I don't care for Mexicans, because I am of Mexican descent. It's the fact that I know nothing about Mexico. I was never taught anything about Mexico in the system, in the school system. There was never anything there to take who I was as a human being, as defined by the system, which was a minority, because we were not part of the majority. You understand? That's critical. So the system makes you a minority just by existing. The system is racist in that respect. But then what that means is that to the victor belongs the spoils. If you fit into that hegemony, if you're white, you're all right. If you speak English, you're fine. If you choose the history, that's what you learn, and that you came through Ellis Island, you came into the 13 colonies, you moved westward, you're the great pioneer, and what have you. Everything's inuring to you. You're receiving the benefits of the hegemony, the culture. So everything's cool with you. You think that you're naturally smarter than anybody else, not because you want to brag. And I didn't fit into that culture. Why? Because I ate beans and tortillas for breakfast. But yet what's being taught in the school was what a typical breakfast consisted of was eggs, juice, toast, and what have you. I ate beans and tortillas. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, except that part of the inculcation process, part of the assimilation process, just like raising your kids, you want to give them positive strokes, warm fuzzies. You want to reinforce them, reinforce their belief systems, reinforce how the way they behave, correct them when they misbehave. There was no reinforcement of who I was in the system that I went through. I was always different. So what's the difference? What's the difference here? Well, once you learn English, you're okay. Once you learn history, you accept it. But you can never change your color. You can never change your color. And the variation of color, when you look at the color spectrum, and the darker you are, the more to the, let's say, the left you are, and the lighter you are, the more towards acceptable you are. That's just the way the mentality works. And so everything is for the benefit of white people. Now, I don't mean to be racist. I'm talking facts here. And until we understand that, until I understood it, I wasn't able to escape. I was in a state of confusion. What was going on when I graduated from high school? One of 12 Americans of Mexican descent, while we had many that started in the grade schools, for some reason, and I can get into the reasons, but I won't at this time. Only 12 of us graduated from high school. That's pretty special. That's almost like being a PhD. When you graduate from high school, in my time, in 1965, that was a big deal. And so I was I want to say the cock of the walk or the walk of the cock, whatever. I was the person who was strutting. I got my diploma in my pocket. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to enjoy life. I'm ready to be an American and take benefit of its promise and its dreams and everything. I'm there. What happens the first day after I graduated from high school? I have to go get a summer job now because I got my diploma in my hip pocket, and I see that there's 2 jobs available there. One is a produce manager in a grocery store, and the other is a safety patrol dispatcher. And that's the job I went to the job service for. Now, I'm not used to going to the job service because I always had a guaranteed job in the summer because we always helped our parents during the summer by working in the sugar beet fields with them. Except now I'm a man. I'm 18 years old or 17, whatever it was when I graduated from high school. And I want to get out there. I'm full of whiz and vinegar, as I said. And so I get to the job service, and there's two lines. There's two lines there. A lot of people. So the lady who's at front, she goes, "Sir, you have to go to that line." So I follow orders. I don't know no different. As I make my way up towards her, and first thing she says, "You have to go to that counselor over there." Okay. Went to the counselor, sat down. I still remember his name. His name is Reverend Stanley Toll. Reverend Toll passed away a few years ago. He's an elderly gentleman, and nothing against him. He was a wonderful human being, a great person. But he gave me some good advice, which I didn't like. He asked me how many acres of sugar beets I wanted. I said, "No, wait a minute. Sugar beets? Don't you know who I am? I'm Reynaldo Cervantes. I got a diploma here in my hip pocket. I'm going to apply for that produce job, or I want to apply for that safety dispatcher because I can speak. And of course I work in the sugar beet fields. Produce is my game, and produce is my, it's what I do. Sugar beets, produce, whatever." He goes, "No," he says, "you got it all wrong, son." He says, "That line over there is the line that you go to apply for those jobs." And I looked over there, and that line had no brown people in it. Well, Scottsbluff's a little bitty town, 12,000, 13,000. Those produce jobs are going to go with somebody that has connections, and I had no connections. He said, I would recommend to you, not only are you not going to get that kind of job, he told me, he says, you better get out of town, because you better get out of Dodge, because the Cervantes name is just no good. It just isn't, it's got a bad reputation. Well, I tell you what, that was really, for me, from a psychological perspective, I mean, that's a shock. That's a shock to my belief system. That's a shock to my assimilation, to what my understanding of life was all about. And it left me reeling. I couldn't find myself after that. I ended up working sugar beets that year. And after the sugar beet were over, I had to go look for part-time jobs, ended up at the pool halls with my friends. All of my cousins, everybody, all the other people of color were there along with it. But this is a white world. This world gives all the advantages, and nothing's changed. Nothing's changed in terms of that hegemony. Now, I was able to have a good life, which I'll get into in my next show here, only because I am brown, and only because of affirmative action. But affirmative action came about after we had the big blowouts of the 60s, when America was on the precipice. We had a revolution going on then, and there was blood spilled on the streets, and there was blood being spilled on the battlefields of Vietnam. And there was a big, big movement where I think we almost lost control. And so when it died down, there were a lot of new policies implemented to placate the masses, to address some of the issues of discrimination, some of the issues of bigotry, some of the issues of unfairness that were coming up at that time. And so I am a product of affirmative action. But now I have to get into this issue of what was it that it took me from this, where I was almost in a stupor, reeling from hitting that wall of reality. I call it the glass wall of reality. I know females talk about the glass ceiling. Well, I talk about a glass wall because it's transparent. They make you think that you're an equal, but you're really not. If you keep running against that wall, keep trying to make yourself acceptable to a system that's not set up for you, what that creates is self-hatred. It destroys your dignity. It destroys your self-esteem. If you're lucky enough to get through that system, but I'm sure that as I experience that system now, as I look back, my self-esteem was being destroyed because I wanted so much to be accepted. I wanted so much to be part of mainstream society, and it wouldn't happen. It did not happen. Now, I'm not anything special. I think that if you look at people's lives, but I'm able to, they experience the very same thing, except some people, when they run into that wall of reality, they can never accept it. They never want to admit to this part that's so negative about them, the self-hatred part. I talk about the fact that the fact that they've got you so mixed up, indoctrinated, hating yourself so much, thinking about you as a minority, that every time you have a violent crime committed in Omaha or anywhere, you're just praying that it's not a Mexican. Think about that. You're praying that it's not a Mexican. Why? Why? Because it has negative connotations that are the consequence of white hegemony. And when I come back to my next program, I'm going to go on from there and talk about the Chicano Awareness Center and my epiphany, where I became a Chicano, which was a totally freeing experience. So, until we meet again, God bless you. God bless your family. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you God willing, in next week. Take care.